So this is where we left off in class last time. And what we got here is our 4 image planes. And what we're going to do is we're going to do some basic modeling. One of the first things I'm going to do is I'm going to hide these from my perspective view by selecting each image plane that we imported. And under the attribute editor, if you can't locate it, it's up here in the far right corner. Show hide attribute editor, or Command A will also do it as well, or Control A. Control A. I'm used to Windows, so it's Control A in Windows and Mac. So anyway, I'm going to click this looking through camera, and now you'll notice that in my front view, do the same thing for this one. So my front view and my back view. So this is my front view. I can see just the front image plane. If I go to my back, you can see just the back image plane. I'll do the same for each one of these, and then as needed, I will change to whichever camera angle I need. So what I'm going to do is you always want to start, as long as you have reference material to model from, you want to start modeling in your orthographic cameras. And in this case, we're going to do something called, we're going to do some box modeling. And in this case, what we can do is we can just start with a cube. So select the cube and just click it. I'll do that one more time. And it'll just appear right here. This is Maya 2016 for Mac. Now, a couple of things we can do as well is, because I want to be able to see my reference through my mesh, I'm going to check up here and search for X-ray. And this little button X-ray allows us to see through our mesh, even though it's not really transparent. So, going back here, I'm going to just use my reference planes and just sort of scale this to approximately the size that I need it. Scale and move it. So the first thing I'm going to do is, in my side view, just get the approximate size of it, something close to this. Doesn't need to be exact at this moment. Turn on X-ray here as well. And for the base of the body, I'm simply going to do something like so. So now this will be the front of my vehicle. So now I'm in the front view port, so I can get the actual width of the vehicle. And in my side view port, I get the length of it. So a few tricks we can use are, we can begin to play around with our polycube 1 settings in the attribute editor, which allows us to adjust the subdivisions fairly quickly and easily. In this case, we can go ahead and go about 6 or, I don't know, maybe 8 divisions on depth, and maybe 2 for right now on the height, and then the width, which would be directly down the center. I'm going to go to 4. So this way I have one that goes directly down the center, but I also have 2 that I can play around with. So in here, and you'll notice as long as you set up your image planes correctly, they should all be approximately the same exact size. Turn X-ray on. So now what I'm going to do here is I'm simply going to just start adjusting, moving around and sliding around some edges and some verts. So I'm going to start in the side viewport, and all I'm going to do is begin to highlight my edges and vertices and begin this process of simply, I can highlight all of these because I'm going to want this edge directly on the door approximately. I can bring these down here, and now I've got pretty much the outline of my door, as you can see with these edges. And I'm going to simply just begin this process of sort of just scaling them all together and moving them into place. Here I'm scaling them down because I want to keep some equal distance between them apart, and then something like so. And that's pretty close. Another thing you can do is you can barely even see that the mesh is there without having it selected. So if you feel more comfortable, you can go into shading and select wireframe on shaded, and now you'll be able to see the wireframe above it. Switch now to our front viewport, and you can toggle on or off wireframe on shaded, and that will allow you to see your geometry directly on the mesh without having it selected. So the next thing, I can still play around with these vertices to begin to just move these into place, and as needed, just move whichever ones that need to be moved into place. So instead of what I just did was highlight these, move these into place, and then move these into place, they're not going to be exact. In cars and really anything that's manufactured in a way like this is generally symmetrical. So if I hold Command, hold Shift, and right click, I can turn on the Symmetry and go to Symmetry, and now you'll notice that if I highlight this side, the other side becomes highlighted as well, and anything I do to one side will do exactly to the other side. So that's really useful. I'm going to go ahead and do that, and now you can see that I've got the basic shape of it. Switching to my top view, just to double check a couple things, you might want to sort of round this out a little bit, just slightly. Looks slightly rounded at the top, and then as well as back here. I'll go ahead and select these and move them back. I'll move this one in because it looks like it's got that rounder type of body to it. A great way to check to see if it's starting to look like your actual car, and especially in this instance, by hitting 3 and checking your viewports, does it overall pretty much match the vehicle shape itself? And it does. So I'm going to put on my wireframe on shaded in this viewport as well. So that's one way of starting a model, and in this case this is a pretty decent shape to model in that fashion by adjusting the geometry before we start modeling it, to kind of give us a rough idea of how many edges and things like that we might need. The other thing is we can also model an entirely different way by getting these edge loops and extra geometry, but we'd have to do it manually. But this is a very common way to model, and it's called box modeling. It's basically just a ton of extruding. So what we're going to do here is for the side fender here, this side fender, what I'm going to do is I'm going to box model that. I'm going to start with a cube, and I'm going to go ahead and just move it, I don't know, about here, and I'm going to scale it. Actually, I'm going to start at the front of the vehicle in this case and scale it to approximately the size I'm going to need it. Now this is an entirely different technique. And one thing I noticed is that if this happens to you and you lose geometry, it's probably inside this mesh. So here's a quick little tip. Create a layer, select it in the channel box, channel layer box, up here, show hide channel box. Displays or hides channel box in layer editor, just like Photoshop or Flash or any type of, or Premiere, anything that involves layers, Illustrator. Go to layer, create layer from selected, and then you can just toggle the visibility of it. So here is the front, the cube I just created. And with that hidden, now I can focus solely on this piece. In my front viewport, I want to make sure that I move it into place, scale it to size, and I know in this case I want to go to vertex. I'm going to turn off my symmetry for the time being, and now I'm going to select this vertice and just start to manipulate this into place. Okay, so the most common tool used in this process, and a very common modeling tool, one of the most used modeling tools, is Extrude. The Extrude. So in order to use it, you need to select a face, vertex, or edge. Generally, you wouldn't use it on a vertex, but on an edge or face is just fine. In this case, we're just going to focus with the face. So hold right click, go down to face, select your face, and then we're only going to do one side for now. Edit mesh and go to extrude, and you'll notice you get a poly extrude over here in the inputs of your channel box, and it starts to look a little bit different as far as your move, scale, and rotate tool. I'm going to focus right here. I'm going to hit W for the move tool, and I'm simply going to just go ahead and move and scale this as needed. And I will extrude again. I hit G as the keyboard shortcut for the last tool used, and you'll see that it's starting to take that shape. And I'm going to do it again, and I'm going to continuously repeat this process until I get the overall shape of what I need. And you can always check a 3, press 3 to sort of get an idea. As long as it's basically forming the shape that you need, you're in good shape then. And it doesn't need to be perfect. This is your first try at this, so no big deal. And I'm pressing G for last tool used, which is my extrude tool. G for last tool used, and I'm just going to repeat this process all the way through until it resembles what I'm looking for. and this does add quite a bit of geometry, but in this case it's needed because we're going around these circles. I don't even have enough geometry on this one, so I would have to manually add some there. And there we go. Alright, so just double check it with 3, and it's starting to take shape pretty well. One last thing we can do is I can, in my layer, I can turn this back on. I can smooth this so it sort of starts to resemble the vehicle a bit. And another thing I can do, and this is the last thing we'll go over for the time being, is holding D to move your pivot point. And this is really important because what we're going to do is we're actually going to duplicate this side piece. So in order to do that, I need to, in order to have it flip on the exact opposite side, I need this pivot point to be exactly center on the grid so it'll flip nice and easily. So if I hold D, I can slide my pivot point. And if I hold X and I just move, X will snap to the grid. So we need to do a combination of both, holding D and X, and then snap that to the 0 point. It'll snap directly to 0, and you'll notice here, it's right on that grid line. And if I go to flip this, one of the things I need is, and this is extremely important in modeling and animation, is I need my channel box to be zeroed out or froze, which is freezing transformations will zero out all these numbers. The scales will all be 1, but the translates and rotates will be 0. And in order to do that, go to Modify, Freeze Transformations, and now what we're going to do is in Edit, Duplicate, and then Scale, -1. Now one thing about duplicating an object is scaling it -1 on the x-axis. This x-axis here on the grid, this line directly down the middle of our reference, is the x-axis at 0 from the front viewport. We can have a more useful duplicate because if I go through the process of making any adjustments to this, I can't even turn on symmetry because they're two separate objects. So if I go through the object, it doesn't duplicate it. I would have to delete this and duplicate it again later. So in order to avoid that, we're going to do something called Duplicate Special. So if we go to Edit, Duplicate Special, and hit the little box just to make sure, and under Geometry Type, change it to an Instance, and hit Duplicate Special. And now scale it at -1, and now anything I do to one model, it will do to the other. So that is super useful. And then expanding on the mesh itself, the base mesh we started with, we can continue moving forward with it, but we won't go too much farther. In our top viewport, in here, we can sort of, I just selected the faces while holding shift. We can begin to create any type of adjustments we need using the Extrude tool. So under Edit Mesh, Extrude. Now while I'm in smooth mode, you can see that it actually, you're creating extra edge loop right here because you're creating new faces. In 1 you cannot see that, but in 3, which is smooth mode, you can. So be very careful when working that you don't hit the extrude button too many times, realizing that you're not, just to make sure you don't get multiple extrudes and multiple extra faces that you don't need, which can cause problems later. So I'm going to scale this slightly smaller, and this will be for the seating part of the vehicle. And I'll just go ahead from this point and actually just extrude down. And now I've got the start of my little box car going. I hit 3, and you'll see that you start to get that shape. The other things I can do is I can turn back on my symmetry. You'll know it's symmetrical if it highlights in blue. And go ahead and I can start to change the shape to a closer, more exact look of it. So that's pretty close right now. And one thing you'll also see is that we've got some extra hard edges here. You see how these are harder edges versus these are soft. In order to change that, select the mesh and hold Shift and hold right click and go to Soften, Harden Edge, Soften Edge, Soften, Harden Edge, Soften Edge, and you'll get a softer look around that. So that's all we've really got for today. I don't want you to go too crazy with the topology, and the reason being is check it in smooth mode, because what we can do later is we can quickly and easily add extra geometry by going to smooth mode, and you'll see that it starts to recreate that shape that you originally were checking in smooth mode. But you don't want to do that until you're 110% sure that you're done with the basic model. And I can soften edges on these to give it that look a little bit. These edges are going to start to give this weird black line and stuff, and that's just because it's trying to soften an edge that's it needs one more piece of geometry in there for it to sort of not look like that. So anyway, if I were to, just to show you what I mean, I'll just highlight all those edges, and I will go to Soften, Harden Edge. Oh, and I'll harden these edges, and you'll see that you lose that weird look to it. But it'll look like this in the end anyway, or at least similar to this. And that's all there really is for this basic model today. We'll continue practicing some other things and techniques on this next time we're in class. But this is enough to get you guys started. And yeah, we'll continue with this next time.